Hello, everyone. We're back with our first Malaysian Open Alumni 2.0 Ad Talk webinar series. We are a small team of English language educators who have taken online courses that were funded by the U.S. Department of State via the U.S. Embassy, Kuala Lumpur. So if any one of you out there who is an alumni of this program, we look forward to you joining us in the future. So by the way, I'm Josephine Lai, your moderator for today. And this webinar is a part of DAO project, which has been chosen as the recipient of the 2021 Simon Greenall Award that is sponsored by Macmillan Education, International House World Organization, and International House London. Before we begin, I would like to tell a little bit about Mr. Pravin Balakrishnan. He is a wonderful and committed English language teacher who is currently teaching at SMK Padang Midin, Terengganu. Mr. Pravin has obtained his Bachelor of Education with Honours in TESOL in 2013 from University of Portsmouth, UK. He continued doing his master degree in Loyola University, Chicago in USA in 2019. He was a recipient of the Foreign Fulbright Student Program Scholarship. Among some of the awards that he has won were the Winnie Chan Award in 2016, Best ICT Innovation in 2017, and the YTL Foundation School Award in 2018. Other than being a down-to-earth teacher and a researcher, Mr. Pravin is also one of the many prolific writers for the Medium online magazine. It is an open platform for, where more than 100 million readers and authors find, share, and exchange conversations over the best and important ideas. I believe Pravin is a natural writer. In one of his articles, he wrote that, I quote, "Over the years, my writing has shifted from a casual, informal, and unstructured flow to an academic one," unquote. He also went on, I quote, "By limiting my writing conventions to academic frontiers, I felt a huge part of me is now missing," unquote. He wrote this and posted in Medium in November 2020. Then a month later, he went on to become one of the prize winners for the KISA Futures competition with his story Edurena, The Fate of Veracity, and which was published in the KISA Future Anthology. The collections of storytelling in this book envisions a world beyond the pandemic. It was really a wonderful written story. After reading it, I couldn't help but felt very sympathetic towards the main character. And I also have to agree with Mr. Pravin, how apathetic the system can be. In today's webinar, he will be talking about bringing stories to life through comics. Before I pass the precious time to Mr. Pravin, allow me to remind every participant who are with us this morning. There are some rules, ground rules to be observed. First, that is to make sure your details in the survey form are correct, especially your emails. You will get your e-certificates through email within a week after the webinar is over. The link to the survey and e-certificate form is only accessible for a short amount of time before it will be deactivated. For Malaysian participants out there, there is a separate link that you can fill in for the SPL KPM. So another one thing that I would like to add, please feel free to drop any questions in the chat box, and I'm sure Mr. Pravin will try his very best to answer each and every one of them. And we do have a Q&A session right after Mr. Pravin's sharing is over. So stay tuned and enjoy. So over to you, Mr. Pravin.
Okay. All right. Okay. Thank you, Madam Jo, for that amazing introduction. I'm very, very humbled by it. But thank you so much. Okay, so we are going to go straight into it, but I'm just going to take like maybe a few seconds to say thanks to Dr. Sirajwan for organizing this and also like giving me this platform. So today I'm going to talk about bringing stories to life through comics. I'm not an expert in this, in this field, but I just have some little experience that I think that is worth sharing. And comics has always been one of the, it's always been undervalued when it comes to as an educational tool. So my plan is to explore this, and hopefully that we all can gain something out of this today, and we can apply it for our students. Okay. So, but why comics to start with? Why do we want to use comics in the first place when there's like so many other tools out there right now? So generally, comics is a medium to tell a story. And it's not just about telling a story, but how to tell a story. When you're dealing with comics, when you are giving students to produce their own comics, they are not just telling a story, but they need to know how to tell it in a way that is presentable, it is captivating, it engages the audience. So it is more than just stories, but it's how to tell a story. And also what comics does is like, it gives us the space to think alternative futures for the world. Currently, we are in a pandemic, and everything has paused. Everything's reopening again, but comic allows us to think about alternative ways, alternative futures. Like, what if the world never had a pandemic? And through a comic, a student can explore this. What if the pandemic lasted for 20 years? By giving this kind of topics for our students, it allows them to expand their thinking, at the same time expand their imagination. And also comics, the visual elements definitely contribute to the meaning and tone. So there's a lot of things in comics that we can explore, and also we can unpack to get our students to just expand their imagination and think about a certain thing at a certain situation from different perspectives. So that's why comics is a great way actually to engage our students, and it's a tool for our students, and it should be in their toolbox for them to be able to use it. Okay, let's move on. Okay, so this is from Wikipedia. What is a comic book actually? Okay, comic is basically a magazine or a book containing sequential art in the form, so it's a typo there, in the form of a narrative. Okay, so the most important word is sequential art. What happens in a comic is basically the past, the present, and the future is all aligned in one single page. Okay, when you are reading a comic, you look at the past, and then you move to the present, and then you're seeing the future as well. So this sequence actually helps the learner to actually build the narrative, and the student be able to see the past, the present, and future, and connect the dots. So that is one. It's not like film or television or like animation where it just flows through. With comic, the student can actually go back to the past or go to the future. Okay, so these are two types of comics. The one on the left is Lao Fuzi. Maybe if you are from my era, or maybe someone who's older than me, you will have come across this in hair salons or barber shops. When you go and cut your hair, you might see this cartoon. It's old Master Q. The Chinese name is Lao Fuzi. It's an amazing cartoon. And it's always funny. It's always something funny going on with this character, with the old man. So here there's a sequence of that happening where he's pranking his, I think maybe his girlfriend. And then on the right, we see a very serious cartoon. It's actually, not cartoon, comic, which is Watchmen, the character called Rorschach. Okay. So what he says here is, because there's good and there's evil, and evil must be punished even in the face of Armageddon, I shall not compromise in this. But there are so many deserving of retribution. So with comics, you can go to something very funny, and you can go to something very serious dealing with social justice. And this is, this goes on with any medium or any other media, but with comic is more apparent because it can reach students and it can reach teenagers who are actually the future generation, right? Because we soon will be extinct. So having such kind of tools and for students to explore such kind of comics, it gives them a sense of a better sense of the world, a better perspective of how the world is being governed. And also, like what I said earlier, what comics does is like it gives you that alternative to think about the future differently. All right, okay, we'll move on. So what are the things that we'll be covering today? Okay, so the first thing that we'll be looking at is the types of comics. Okay, followed by the strengths of comics in the language classroom. Then why do we bring stories to life through comics? The educational potential of comics. And then I will give some strategies on how we can use and how as we as teachers, how can we use comics in the classroom? And then we'll look at how to bring stories to life. I'll give an example. And then I will show how we can utilize some web tools to actually get students to actually create their own comics using digital tools. There are a lot of free tools out there. So that is what I'm generally going to be talking today. And hopefully that we can learn something out of it. I'm also looking forward to actually learn from all of you out there who's watching this as well. Okay, so the first one we have is science fiction comics. Again, the theme of science fiction, it actually provides an avenue for students to explore endless possibilities. So there are two examples here, Transmetropolitan and Fantastic Four. So Marvel Comics has always been all about superhero, but there's also a dimension of science fiction over there, which actually it actually allows the students to explore things differently, to look at things differently. And this is something that our students are currently lacking because of the influence of social media. Now, what social media does is it somehow reinforces or enforces students or even our learners to think in a certain pattern, and this can be seen in the meme culture, where there's only a certain type of templates, and students use those memes in a certain way and manipulate them. Sometimes this confines them to actually think about things from different perspective. And in the current world we are in, which is so volatile, we do need students to come out with more creative avenues of more creative ventures. One great example is the pandemic. It really threw learning to the side. It made a lot of changes to how we also consume or how we teach as well as teachers. So with science fiction kind of comics, it actually makes the students to think differently, and also opens up space for new lines of thoughts and imagination, which is extremely important in the current situation we are in the current climate change crisis that we might be facing. So this is a start for them actually. So for learners who are exposed to science fiction comics, it gets them to think about the world a little different. Okay, Japanese manga. So manga is amazing. There's a lot of, I don't read much manga, but I've seen my friends religiously reading these mangas day and night or when we are free. So usually mangas are very unique because the stories are mostly educational, mostly self-development. One good example is Naruto. And usually it's done with some research of, there's also a historical account attached to a story. And usually there's something related to folklore as well. So, and this also helps the students' self-development. It increases the students' intellectual stimuli. It provides intellectual stimuli for the readers as well. I have seen I have seen my friends who are like around my age. They say one of their inspirational characters is Naruto, which is interesting. Most of them only engage Naruto as a cartoon, but it also existed as a comic. It started off as a comic as well, if I'm not mistaken. So this kind of comics, it actually helps with students to identify themselves with with who and how they can associate with. Okay, I'll give you a very good example, which is very interesting for me. So this study was done by Murakami and Bryce in 2009. So there's this manga called Moyashimon, Tales of Agriculture. What happened was that when this manga was released, it became very popular, and it actually led to the increase of enrollment in tertiary agriculture studies, which again for me was surprising. Like, this clearly shows like how comics or how manga can really influence like big decision making skills, like your career. It can actually influence your career, and it is crazy because it's not just crazy, but it also shows that manga or comics, it can actually change, it can make you think, and it can also develop your interest on something which maybe you didn't have much interest in. So this is an example of how Moya Shimon actually led to the increase of students going into agriculture studies in Japan. So yeah, this is an example. So there are other two genre of comics which are gaining a lot of traction, gaining a lot of attention recently. One of them is steampunk. So steampunk is a reimagination of the world without electricity or gas or oil. What it actually means is, if the industrial revolution never took place, how would the world look like? So that is what steampunk is about. It's extremely cool. The comics are filled with retro futuristic gadgets. Amazing. You can even see from the cover designs, the 3 cover designs here, they are so there's a lot of nostalgia attached to it. At the same time, a lot of technology attached to it. Okay, and the other one is cyberpunk. Okay, so cyberpunk is also on the rise. There was also a game released recently, Cyberpunk 2077, and also with cyberpunk, it's all about how technology has overtaken humanity. I think one good example will be also Matrix, and I think Matrix recently released the trailer, Matrix the Resurrection, if I'm not mistaken. So cyberpunk is another theme which is like slowly growing as well. But this has been around since 1980s. But recently there has been extra interest in both steampunk and cyberpunk. So what it helps us to do is, both of this genre of comics, it helps us to think about past and also the future. And these are comics that we can which we can introduce to our students as well. Different types of comics. Of course, we have Doraemon, we have Anna Anasi. I don't know if how many people remember Anna Anasi Day, but it was amazing comic when I was growing up. It talked about the lives of the badminton shuttlers in Malaysia, especially the childhood lives, Rashid Siddiq and his brothers Misbun Siddiq and all that. It was an amazing comic. I love them. But nowadays we don't produce such comics anymore. We don't. It's hard for us to produce local stories because one of the main reason is because we are not emphasizing this to our students, and I hope that this presentation there'll be like renewed interest to talk about our stories. But let's go back to steampunk and cyberpunk. Sorry, I just went on a tangent over there. Okay, so steampunk and cyberpunk. Okay, so steampunk is the imagination of the world without electricity, gas, or oil. A world where industrial revolution never took place. So Douglas Federling, he wrote this. Steampunk is a genre that imagines how different the past might have been had the future come earlier. So again, it gives the students insights. It gives them the tool to think about the world differently. And this is something that I want to emphasize. Why should we think about the world differently? Because we are in a volatile and very a world that continuously changing. So that is why we need to give our kids, our students, the right tools, so when they face the future, which is extremely volatile, they'll be able to find ways. And humans are extremely adaptable. So, but these are the tools that will help them to rethink. Right? This is the creative process which builds in, which aids in their scientific discovery. So they need this kind of creative avenues to actually make them dig deep to find scientific or science-based evidence to actually help them to overcome whatever challenges. Okay, and cyberpunk is also a subgenre of science fiction. It's a combination of low life and high tech. So imagine a world where there's conflict between humans and artificial intelligence and cybernetics against the backdrop of a radical change in social order. So there are two examples here, Judge Dredd and also from Japan is Akira. Again, these are also great. This is also a great space where, the way we are living our world right now, artificial intelligence is playing a big role. AI, machine learning is playing a big role. I just want to point out here, in Hong Kong recently, because of the pandemic, there's this tool. It's an AI enhanced tool where it can actually read, not to say read the student's mind, but it actually can see how much attention the student is paying, to the lesson. Okay, so so what it does is like it can actually track the eye movement of the students and how long their eyes are looking at the text or looking at the learning material, and these are used to actually to increase students score, and also in a way to increase productivity. And when we have this kind of AI tools or machine learning tools being used on our students, what we are going to get is we are as humans, we will lose our sense of privacy and also security, and we become and our data might be used against us in the future. So that is why this kind of creative avenues will this kind of creative products will give our students, or a large, I mean, give us humans the to actually have a foresight of what might happen. So that's why this cyberpunk or spunpunk or whatever, or this genre of comics, it allows that expansion of thought. Because if we do not carefully really look at what's happening, we might be one day governed by AI, and we are not that far from that. We are not that really far from that. We are definitely heading there. So this is one way to think about it as well. Okay, so now, so there's a lot of amazing comments coming in. Sorry, I couldn't get to them earlier. So I think there's one comment saying that Anak-Anak Side is the best. I totally agree. Anak-Anak Side is probably one of the best cartoons, best comics ever made. Unfortunately, I don't know why they stopped producing. Okay, so let's just continue. Okay, so the strengths of comics. So the first strength of comic is obvious. It's visual. It immediately captures, but most importantly, it maintains the learner's interest. And this is something that we can work on. This is something that as teachers we can leverage on for our students. And then the next one is visual permanence. Like what I said earlier, the reader controls the pace of the progress. So it's unlike film or cartoon, with comics, there's a sense of permanence where the learner can always go back and come back to a certain panel or certain frame. And then there's an emotional connection. So with comics, there's a bond between the reader and the character story and the arc and the plot. So this emotional connection means the student is emotionally invested in the character, and you know, when they are emotionally invested, they get more out of it. I think one example, this is not a comic, this is actually a movie, will be like Iron Man from Avengers. So everyone was so captivated. There was an emotional bond between Robert Downey Jr. playing as Tony Stark, and when he died, you know, the theaters were sad, people were crying. So there was that emotional bond, and that emotional bond can also be found in comics, can also be built in comics. Okay, so the next strength of comic is students can develop their thinking skills. Again, comics offer profound insights, and it builds on students' analytical and critical thinking skills. It's also intermediary, meaning comics are very non-threatening to readers, and it scaffolds learners, and it also builds their confidence when it comes to reading. If you give your student like a 400-word essay, ask them to read, ask them to pick out some interesting vocab, it's going to be a little bit tough for them. It can look a little bit overwhelming and also threatening, especially if English is a foreign language in that context. Comic breaks through all that because it is super non-threatening. There's a lot of colors in it, and a kid's mind is like absorbs all those colors, and it works for them really, really well. So this helps them to actually learn something, and it scaffolds them. I think it goes back to Vygotsky's zone of proximal development. And also comics are popular as well. It usually includes contemporary themes, latest themes. I think there's one manga which is really popular right now because it has been made into a cartoon, Attack on the Titans. So I actually watched the cartoon first, then I went to the comics, I went back to the manga. So Attack on the Titans, it's super popular with my students, and weirdly, it also resonates with my students, especially the main character. When he goes into the beast mode, they are able to relate that with their own sense of anger. So this is also something that we can leverage on as teachers. All right. So what is the educational potential? Okay. So to begin with, students are growing up in a visual culture. We can see this in the meme culture that students participate in. We can see this in social media, in TikTok, basically in how they participate or consume media. There's a lot of visual culture into it. All right. So and comics are actually part of this, but it's so untapped that we feel like comics are so backdated because it has been there for some time now, and we feel like comics is not part of this. Actually, comics are, and we can leverage on this because it's also printed. Uh, I mean, if you're using a printed copy, there's also a digital copy, but we can use this as a good way to introduce our learners to certain difficult topics. Okay, but and what I am very what I would like to emphasize is comics are actually permanent. What I mean by permanent is like what I said earlier, the past, present, and future all sit side by side in the same page. So the rate of information flow is controlled by the reader. So when you have like right now, we have been using television for education with DD TV. So the rate of information is not controlled by the reader if it's television or animation, right? Because it goes on one flow and the student has to keep pace. But if it's done, if those material are made into comics, now the reader controls what goes next. And if he or she does not understand a certain thing, they can always go back. They can always go back to that panel or to that frame and look at it and try to make sense of what's going on or what they're trying to learn. So again, so that goes back to the next point. When students do not understand something, they can reread it as quickly or as slowly as they want. And again, visual nature is permanent and this promotes meaning. What it actually means is students make meaning out of what they are reading. So students control the meaning. And also comics are short and sweet. It's very comprehensive for the learner. And again, it's not overwhelming for them. So here's another set of ideas, the educational output. So there's this study by University of Oregon where it says that comic books average 53.5 rare words per thousand, compared with an average 30.9 rare words per thousand in children books, and also higher than the adult average of 52.7. So with comics, there's a lot of sophisticated words that students can learn. There's a sense of sophistication. And I've seen this with my students as well, who actually read manga, who read comics. They have certain knowledge which I might not have. And that is very interesting. For example, when it comes to, earlier on, I told about the agriculture cartoon, right? Moyashimon. So same thing, if someone who reads those comics, they'll have some form of knowledge on agriculture that the average teacher in the classroom might not have. So this is the kind of knowledge that actually helps them to grow further and also increase their interest on a certain topic. And the depth of content. Interestingly, comic books, they cover a range of complex issues. One of the first comic books that became popular in education was called Mouse, M-A-U-S, which it was in the US actually. So Mouse became extremely popular because it talked about a very complex issue, which was the Holocaust. So again, with comics, there's a lot of complex issues that it can cover, and it does not have to be something like something very superficial or something very on the surface. And also with the visual storytelling in graphic novels also helps students to experience more empathy when exploring these topics. And also, without a doubt, comics are fun. They are easy to read. They are fun to read. And it's a great satisfaction in completing a book. Like when you read a comic, you can be done with it within a day or two, or maybe 3 or 4 days, most likely a week at max. So students find great satisfaction in this. It's not something heavy. They can finish it as soon as possible, and for them that's a sense of achievement that they can build on. And also the reading stamina. So there's a lot of visual, there's a lot of art, and this can help students to maintain their stamina when reading. And also when it's time of anxiety or stress, they can always go to a comic and just forget about the world. So there's also another way. This is also another way for them to actually to unwind from life, I guess. But what I want to say is comics have been getting a lot of attention recently. Not in Malaysia, I think, but elsewhere, especially in the West. But comics became a big problem during 1950s. The educational output for comics was not really. I mean, the educational output for comics was dismissed because uh, a study by this guy, by this professor, I think, by his name is Wortham. What he did was he was going through the profiles of juvenile delinquents, and all these juvenile delinquents, they had one thing in common: they all read comics. So this was around the 1960s. So comics was associated as something negative back then, and that was a stigma that continued up until the 1980s, when comics again started to make itself into the scene, into the educational scene. But comics as a tool at times is associated with something negative, maybe because of its graphic nature. But comics has a lot of educational outputs. There's a lot of things that we can gain from comics as well as adults, and we can definitely use that for our students as well. Okay, so how is comics related to language skills? Okay, so with reading, comics provide small chunks of language. It is comprehensible for the students, and it's also easy for the students to engage with. And when it comes to listening, when we have role playing activities, or when we need to discuss viewpoints, uh, comics help with that. It helps to students will need to listen and also evaluate, and this in return this aids critical thinking skills. Next up, speaking. With speaking, reading aloud, and when we are discussing things related to comic, there needs to be sense of discussion, a sense of explanation, and ultimately reflection. And also with comics, we can write dialogues and also use idiomatic expressions. Okay, so now, so this is the important bit that we are coming into. So we had all that bit earlier was all about comics, the background, the benefits of it. I was trying to sell comics to you. I hope I did a good job selling comics to you. To be fair, I am not. I do not use comics as extensively in the classroom, uh, especially right now with the pandemic going on. But what I noticed is if the activities related to comics or making a comics, I have an increased participation from both boys and girls is equal. And I think girls participate more when it comes to comics as well. I think I can also say that as well. So so comics is for everyone. It's just not for boys. So the idea that boys don't read and boys only want to I mean, like, boys don't read, comics work for boys. Uh, so that's not really the case, I would say. So yeah, there's a good comment there from Charles Hetfield. Comics were called penny dreadfuls by people who thought they were dangerous influence on youth. So again, there's a lot of stigma, there's a lot of negativity attached to comics. I'm not sure why. Most likely, I mean, if I did more research on it, I would know why. But most likely, it's because of the visual culture that comic brings in. And but if we don't leverage on that, if we do not leverage on the visual culture, then we are missing out on a lot of things, because it we cannot willfully ignore what's happening, and we need to give such tools to our students to enable them to become better learners, right? To become better humans for the future, and comics could be just one of them. So these are the seven strategies. um, the first one, I'm going to give some strategies. The first one is closed activities, followed by jigsaw reading, then dialogue writing, describing no text comics, prediction and sequencing, and then finally producing own comic. So there is something very student centered, and students really love to produce their own stuff. Actually, I think the types of students we are dealing with today are far more advanced than we think of them. Sometimes they are some of them are really good at creating content. They already have the skill set. I'm not sure how they got it. Most likely they grew up in that kind of culture. And also role playing. So enabling our students to create, to produce their own comics gives them that sense of autonomy. And I've tried that with my students, a simple comic strip, and they enjoyed it. Okay, let's continue. Okay, so for closed activities, so this is one of the strategies. So for vocabulary, it helps with contextualization, colloquial language. So it gives so students will be aware of the colloquial languages with comics. It helps with that. Idiomatic speech and also slang. And for grammar, closed activities helps in getting the students to focus on specific grammar items, past tense, present tense, tenses, past participle as well, on specific grammar items. Okay, highlight specific grammar structures as well, and also it gives a sense of contextualization. So here is an example. So I'm going to give an activity for beginner level students, also advanced level of students. So this is super easy to do. Anyone can do this. Any teacher can do this. Okay, what you do is you take a strip of comic. Garfield works best, I think. Anything that you can find on the internet. Remove one word, okay, or one grammar item that you are teaching, and then you give students with a potential set of answers. So in this case, Garfield, wake up. Garfield continues to sleep, but his sleep is disturbed. You, the entire day. I did. The year is off to a good start. This year is off to a good start. So then there's A, B, C, D. You got slept off, slept away, slept over, slept on. So again, we can do something like this is to teach phrasal verbs. And this is something which you can do with your students. And it's extremely easy. And it's also fun for the students. Like, it's not something where they're reading something serious. This takes away those all those threatening elements out of language learning. I'm not sure if students can relate to Garfield, but I'm pretty sure if you use an anime or you use the manga which students can relate, then they can definitely engage more. So in this case, students might give the answer. I mean, what is the best answer for this? The answer is B, slept away. But you also can take this opportunity to explain to them what is the meaning of slept off or slept over and slept on, like how these are used in sentences as well. So you can use such activity with beginner level students. For advanced level students, you can do something like this. You remove a group of words or sentences, and students are given the opportunity to write their own answers. Now, for this kind of activity, for this kind of structure, the students need to have a firm grasp of grammar, so they're able to write a sentence which is error-free. That, I mean, even if they write a sentence which contains error, it's no problem. But it can appear threatening for lower proficiency learners. They might feel a little anxious if they need to write the reply on their own. They might feel a little bit threatened. So it's always good if you're dealing with lower proficiency students. This would be the best way to go about it. If you're looking at advanced level of students who are able to write their own pieces, who have a lot of imagination, this would be the best way to go about it. They would enjoy doing it, and they would come with a lot of creative replies. So if you're out there listening, if you have any creative replies, what would you reply to this? Like, Garfield, wake up. Garfield's sleep is destroyed now. He is awake. I did. So what would Garfield's owner, what would he say? What is he saying? So if you have any interesting response, you can just type out in the chat. We can definitely share it around. In the meantime, I'm looking at a lot of amazing responses on the chat box. So thank you for that. I think there's one there's one sharing by Amiza. I did a reimagine nursery rhyme into stories with kids once. They used comic characters to draw their story. Very, very cute. I think using nursery rhymes is amazing in the classrooms, and it definitely connects with the learners. I also did one activity before, which really help the learners, which not really help the learners, but they feel really excited to use it, which was they needed to take a Malay song, a Malay language song, and translate it to English. So that was also fun for them, because they took some interesting Malay songs and they were like using Google Translate, they were like using their dictionaries, and they had to translate this song to English, and they had to sing they had to sing the song after that. So that's another way to also, I mean, that's not related to comics, but that's another fun activity that we can use for our students. Okay, sleep the day away. So we also can use, so there's this comment by Lee Jia Ru. I hope I got your name correct. So sleep the day away. We can also use it to introduce idioms for our students. So again, there are a lot of ways we can use this, and this is something we can do for our advanced level students. Okay, let's continue. Okay, so the next one is jigsaw reading. I'm pretty sure most of us have tried this in class. Most of the time when I do jigsaw reading, it is utter failure. It doesn't work because students will be like, oh, we need to read this long text, and and then we need to like find a partner, look for partners who have and to get the correct sequence, and it just throws them off, like. But with comics, it makes life a bit more easier for the teacher, and it makes the life a little bit more interesting for the student, especially for students who are reading a lot of things every day. So jigsaw reading using comics is probably one of the best ways to start the lesson, to get them to just like feel free. And what it helps is it promotes higher order thinking skills. It promotes language awareness. It increases reading and vocabulary skills. And also, it also promotes the ability to negotiate and make meaning by sequencing. And students have to analyze language patterns. Okay, we'll just get into it. All right. So, let's look here. Okay. This is the procedure. We'll get to this later. Let's go to this first. Okay. All right. So with jigsaw reading, for beginner level students, what you can do is you can cut comic strip apart, but we are not in physical classrooms just yet. So what we can do is we can do something like what I just did here, like the images with ABC. So cut comic strip apart and ask students to arrange them in the right order. So you can use this at the beginning of your online classes, especially if you're doing a Google Meet with your students. What you can do is you can share this out there, and you can just tell the students, can you guys reorganize, or can all of you just reorganize this? And then I'm pretty sure students would really will really start either typing or saying out the answers, and this again encourages participation. And you can also mix and match. You can also you can have a couple of series of it. It really depends on your creativity as a teacher, but this is one tool that we can use, especially for beginner level students or for any introductory lessons. We can use this. So ABC, what do you think goes first? Please, what do you think goes first? Okay, if you can just write the answer in the chat box, that'll be great. Let's see if any of you can get it. Which sequence goes first? Was it A, B, or C? Which one follows, and then which is the last one? If there's any replies, I mean, you can definitely. So what we can see is that with this kind of activities, we can get students to immediately engage with the material, and they also will need to think in their head which sequence goes first, which is basically C would go first, followed by B, and then A. So this is the kind of activities that we can try with our students, especially for beginner level students. For advanced level students, it's a little bit more complicated. You might need to be in the physical classroom, but it also can be done online. What you can do is you get each student gets a part of a comic script, and they need to describe to their group mates without showing it. Students then collectively agree on the sequence without looking at each other, without looking at each other's script, and it's best done with comics that only have images. why do I say only have images and no text is because this would require the students to speak a little bit more, to describe a little bit more with uh, uh, the students will need to describe a little bit more regarding the comic, regarding the pictures, the details of each panel. So again, this would improve their speaking skills. So there's a very interesting comment again, by teacher Amiza, I think. So teacher Amiza says, if you have different panels with different endings, and that's really a fun thing to do with students as well. If you have different panels and different endings, again, students will require to come out with different versions of the story. So there are alternate versions of a story, and this is something which you can try with advanced level students as well. And I think with lower proficiency students, you can also try it, but maybe you need to reduce the visual load of the image. So if you look at this image here, the visual load is only Garfield, the coconut, and then the guy. That's all. All right, that's about it. So the visual load is very, very less. And compared to this visual load, if you can see here, there's much more details to it. There's the fat guy. I mean, there's the guy over there. And then there's the woman, their passengers seated between the woman. So there's a lot of things here. Uh, so there's a lot of things going on in this image compared to this. So you also need to look at this when you are giving it for your students. If you're dealing with lower proficiency students, it's always good to give something with less visual load. And also thank you to all the teachers who are sharing their experience with all of us. There's also another comment that says that, but also by teacher Amiza, who says, I used jigsaw and silent comic for class. Students had to rearrange and retell the stories, but had to do it in group with 5 panels because it takes time to prepare it. Exactly, this kind of learning tools, learning materials would definitely take more time to prepare. But if it takes the teacher more time to prepare, that means in the classroom, the teacher has less work to do. I mean, this is a mantra which I use. So, I mean, I'm a teacher, I'm a human. There are times which I feel like I really don't want to prepare for the lesson. But the more you prepare for it, then there's less work for you to do in the class, which is actually works out just nice. And it's actually much better as well as a teacher, because when I go into the class, when I prepare some material and they have to do it, it actually helps me to just take a back seat and chill, and they have to do all the hard work then. Okay, so these are the procedure, and also what can we do with the students. Okay, so we make copies of the cartoon frames, we mix the frames in incorrect sequence, we provide the incorrect sequence to the students, and then students work together to organize the frames, and then we check their work. And what we can do after that is a classroom discussion. Also, there's a comment by teacher Suhaila. I use comic strip from Canva. If you're a teacher, it's time you get onto Canva. If you're not a teacher and if you're just in this presentation for fun, again, go to canva.com. Canva makes any newbies in design like me look like professional. So definitely go into Canva. There's a lot of things we can explore. I've been using Canva these days as well. So yeah, you can definitely use Canva for creating comic strips as well. But I'm going to show a set of different tools later on. Okay, so we can, so coming back to this, after you have done this activity, you can follow on with a classroom discussion. You can ask students what helped you to identify the sequence of the story, which words were they, what were the contextual clues that students use. Okay, and then after they have done it, they have did the sequence, you can also do a follow-up writing activity where they need to write a story using the words to organize it. So this resource, I got it from Teaching English Through Comics, the blogspot.com. You can head over there if you want to get more ideas. All right, next up, dialogue writing. Okay, this is also an activity that you can do with your students. It will require advanced level students or students with a bit more proficiency, so it does not look threatening. So you remove one character's dialogue, and students fill in the bubble. So this would develop students' ability to appropriately respond and also improve their inferencing skills. Okay, there's a good question there by Rika. Any ideas of bringing stories from comics into academic writing prompt? I think I will try to answer the question at the end of this presentation, because the question is extremely nice and I don't want to give a subpar answer right now, so I'll give something on later on. Okay, so this is an activity that you can also do with your students. As you can see, the woman, she comes in, she looks shocked. Morning, Mrs. D, coffee. So if you know about this cartoon, this guy, his name is Pierce, and he's the friend of he's a friend of the son of Mrs. D. Okay, so these are the things which you need to explain to students. So she looks shocked. So what would be the possible dialogue over here? Since you invited me for dinner, I thought I'd come early and help you with cooking. So what was the response here? So this could be one of a response. Not at first. So what would be the appropriate response here for her? So what's actually going on here? So yeah. So this is something that we can use with students, but again, you need students who are creative would enjoy this kind of activity. And also you will need to explain a little bit more if you're dealing with students with lower proficiency on the character's expression. Okay, so this is something that we can also try, dialogue writing with students. Next one, describing no text comics. Okay, so students are given comics without any text and should describe the comics. Okay, so here I've used Lao Fu Zi. So he goes in here, he's singing to this woman. Okay, most likely he's singing something lovely. She picks up the flower from the pot and then she throws the pot onto him and it lands on his head. So now, what students will need to do is they need to actually narrate this story to their learners or to their to their friends or to the teachers or to their teachers. So these kind of activities, it actually promotes pragmatic intelligence. What it actually means, the students will need to connect each sequence by sequence, and this would improve their narrative skills. And it will also help to develop their sequencing and organization skills. And this is extremely important if you have students who are sitting for SPM, which is SPM is like the biggest exam in Malaysia for secondary school students before they head into tertiary education. So what the CFR, the skills that they are focusing on is on sequencing and organization. And this could be one of those materials used to actually develop that. And they also need to able to connect different ideas and simultaneously express coherent ideas. So no text comics is something that you can either do speaking or you also can do a writing activity out of it. What I usually do with no text comics is like I give it to the students. I ask them to prepare a very short text out of it, and then we make it into speaking so they have something to rely on. But if you are dealing with students who use English as their first language, if you're dealing with students who speak English on a daily basis, this should be used as speaking activity fully, not as a writing activity. But if you're dealing with lower level of learners, then do the writing part first, then move into speaking. It actually builds onto their confidence. It makes them more confident to speak when they have something to rely on. So this is another activity that you can try with your students. You can also use it for online lessons. You can just put this photo like 20 minutes before your class, put it into their in their WhatsApp or Telegram, and then tell them, okay, when we start our class, I'm going to call up 3 students to talk about this picture, and then pretty sure they are all going to get prepared. They might feel a little bit anxious, so it's good if you can reduce that anxiety by providing more contextual clues or provide some kind of background to the comic as well. Okay. So next one. Okay, this is a comic by Ernest Ng. I forgot the name of the comic. I think it's COVID something. but it became extremely famous last year during the first lockdown, and it continues being famous. So this is prediction and sequence. So you give students a sequential comic strip with a panel missing. Students are to write the missing panel. So you can do this for missing panel, or you can do this as a missing panel, or you also can come out with a prediction, right? So in here, this virus COVID-19 goes, who is next? Hey you, guess who? It is me, Reno. This is not even my final form, power up. So a question that you can ask your students is, what is Reno's final form? So this is something that you can do with the students, and I think Ernest Ng, he puts his comics on Facebook, and it's very very related to Malaysian context, and it is something that we can use in the classroom as well. And I think his Facebook page, his name is down here. Don't like that bro, or don't be like that bro, or something like that. You can just check him out on Facebook. He has amazing sets of comics, and you can definitely use this in the classroom. I mean, even from the color, and if you're a Malaysian, you can definitely engage with this. It is pretty funny as well. And the final form of this rhino is also very funny. You can use it with your students. Okay. So we are going to move on. Okay. So we are coming to the most interesting part here. Producing own comic from students. So now students becoming the content creators. So this, okay, thank you, Amiza. It's called COVID Balls. That's the name. That's the name of this cartoon, COVID Balls. I think he's also selling copies out of it. He's also selling copies of it. Okay, all right. So this is the most important part, when students become content creators. When we give students the tools to create their own content, there's a sense of empowerment. There is a sense of achievement from the students, because they take learning at their own. Right? There's no more like one directional, unidirectional learning, but now students create their own comics. And when students create their own comics, they feel empowered. They feel like they're able to create something. And as humans living on planets, living on Earth, the ability to create is what drives us. And it's the same thing for students. When it comes to learning, the ability to create something, no matter how big or how small, is what gives them that agency as students to become better learners, to become more responsible, I would say more responsible humans, and live a more fruitful life. So it definitely comes down to this. It comes down to giving tools for our learners to have the agency to express. And by producing their own comics, they are able to do this. It might look something very small, but the ideas are very big. Okay? All right. So how we do this? Okay, students will need to retell a story, or they can just use it as a language practice. Students can use web tools. I'll be introducing some web tools towards the end of this presentation. And the best part about this is students use a chunk-sized language. It's non-threatening for beginners, and also for low proficiency students. And if you have high-level students, producing own comics is also great, because they will be able to express more creatively, and also gives them an avenue to do that. And it also promotes students' literacy with creativity. Okay, so there's an interesting comment by Anis Alwi. I think comic may change how students write stories or recounts. It should be like 1 hour plots rather than a day, a week, a month kind of stories, sometimes never ending stories. This is extremely true. This is something that, I mean, one of the things that CAFR, I mean, the reason why I talk about CAFR, I talk about the National Examination, SPM, is because as much as we want learning to be fun, it also comes down to assessment as well. And this is something that we cannot ignore. And this is something that we cannot say that, it doesn't matter if my students don't do well for exams. As a teacher, we also have that responsibility to prepare them for exams, but at the same time, it's also our responsibility to give them the tools for them to be better humans. And one of the things that CAFR is also looking at is writing recounts and stories. So again, with producing comics, it actually allows them to able to write better recounts and more authentic stories. Okay, so this is a work from my student. This is a work from a student on how to explaining ways to save the environment. Okay, so this is the sequence. She did this using witty comics. I will explain later on witty comics. You know, right, that we can save and protect the environment even though you at home. So there is some grammatical error, but it doesn't matter right now. Okay, oh yeah, I do know, but I do know it, but I don't know how. Can you explain it? You can do it many ways, but here one of them that I always do is you can use paper bag that you bring from home instead of using plastic bags that might be polluted. Oh, I see that, and it's evidently going to work. Thank you for your advice and suggestion. So from this comic, you can see her language is shifts in between. Okay, at the middle panel, you can see more errors. She uses U, the alphabet U instead of YOU, and there are some errors like I always does. Okay, so what is happening here is they are using the language authentically. They are making errors, but it's great. Errors are great because it gives you as a teacher an opportunity to help them. But what is interesting for me was the use in the third panel, she uses the word evidently. So this for me was unique because I just taught them this work a couple of weeks back, and now she's able to use that word here, and it looks really nice, and it is evidently going to work. It looks really nice as well when she uses it, right? It looks correct, and it looks her vocabulary here looks great, and this is something that we can do with our students. We can, by doing such exercise, what it helps to do is students will need to write authentically. One of the things which I've noticed recently is that my students, when I give them a writing task, they go to Google Translate and they use Google Translate to complete their writing task. And surprisingly, Google Translate is pretty accurate and it's pretty close to the original intended meaning of the writer. So at times I don't know if it's their own work or if it's just Google Translate. So for me, the fear of that is that they can use Google Translate then there, but they can't use it for exams, right? Or when the writing is they need to write on a paper. So as much as technology has grown, this is one of the weaker points I would say of technology. Yes, Google Translate helps, but at the same time, what happens, it disempowers the students. Okay, because students always think that, oh, I can go back to Google Translate. In a real life case, there was once I was in an airport. I think I was in an airport in Chicago, and I met this Chinese national woman who speak no English, but she used Google Translate to communicate with me, and it was super interesting because she was talking to me. I mean, it started off with her needing to show the passport to the authority, and then after that, we were having a conversation through Google Translate, and the conversation went to an extent where she was asking me if I was married, what was I doing in Chicago. So it was crazy. I mean, that's how great Google Translate is. But at the same time, it disempowers our students. So when students need to do something like a comic strip, they would not waste their time to go to Google Translate. They would just do it authentically, and this is when you get to really know your students if you are assessing them. Okay, so role playing. So students act out the comic. They need to retell a comic with or without a visual aid. Again, this helps students to learn to negotiate with their partners. I mean, this is something which you can do in the physical classroom. You can also do it you also can do it on Google Meet, but it will not be as fun, not as productive, not as engaging as in the physical classroom. I mean, nothing beats the physical classroom, but we're in a pandemic right now, and online is the best way to go about it. So you can definitely try this with your students. So if they've come out with this, what you can tell to your student is, okay, you have come up with a comic strip. Now I want two of you to act this out as a role play. You can use these dialogues to help you out. And this is something which you can try with your students. Okay, So let's go on now. Why do we bring stories to life through comics? Okay, because stories are part of our lived experiences and comics are permanent visual products. To encourage our students to be visual storytellers, to connect visual with words, which aids in being more reflexive. When students are more reflexive, it uh, makes them to become better thinkers. To have a better understanding of the complex lives of humans. We humans, we have complex lives, but sometimes we distill it, we reduce it into something very, very simple. But the truth is, we have complex lives, and comics helps to bring this out, and of course, to open new lines of thinking and imagination. So, how do students bring stories to life? How do they do this? So they need to curate their stories into authentic and context-specific comic strips. Okay. Again, what they can do is, we as teachers, we can encourage students to reflect on their environment, on their surrounding, and then we can get our students to explore digital and web tools to produce comics. I think Canva comic strip is probably one of the easiest way to go about it as well. If your student is who's going to be sitting for exams, if your student has that exam pressure looming on him or her, you can use comic as a tool for self-assessment or self-review material. And you also can encourage your students to imagine a situation from different perspectives. At the same time, you can ask them, or you can get them to push their boundaries of their given realities, but at the same time keeping a sense of realism. So this is a project by this guy, Johann Julian Lee, and he's coming out with a. So this is an example of authentic comic book, and it's about Sabah folklore comic. So again, this is something that is done locally by a Sabahan comic artist. But to be honest, there are not much things of this. There's not much such local products in place in Malaysia. I think we always go back to Kampong Boy by Lat, a very famous Malaysian artist, comic artist, and we also go back to. There are not many like local Malaysian comic book artists that talks about our local reality, and this is something that we need to inculcate with our students, because uh, we need these stories, as these stories are our heritage, and it has to be there, or if not, we risk um, our identities being erased. So comics is a tool to ensure our heritage continues. Okay, so moving on, these are some web tools that we can use for our comics. You can use this with your students. The one that I used was Witty Comics, and then there's also Make Believes Comics. There is Pixton, there's Toonie Tool, and there's Culture Street. So there's a comment by teacher Anis Alvi. I wish I can draw now. I I was thinking the other day to pick up drawing lessons, because I saw one. I mean, I'm not really interested to produce a comic. Uh, I don't think I have that capacity to do that, to do such kind of intellectual labor. But I was thinking the other day, really want to pick up lessons, because each time I want a drawing, I need to find someone and commission the project out. And I always have this interesting project with my students, and I always want to come out with comics, these comic characters to display these stories, but I'm struggling to do that. So I was thinking that I want to learn drawing lessons, and I totally understand. I wish I had that skill. Unfortunately, I don't, and I can totally resonate with what teacher Ani Salvi. So I'm sorry, you might not be a teacher, but if you are teacher Ani Salvi, I can understand what you're saying. Okay. All right. Okay. So this is Witty Comics. Okay. Witty Comics. So the procedure. This is the easiest for you to use, the best for your students, because registration is not required. And to be fair, if we give something to our students like a tool for them, and it requires registration, the students tend to feel a little bit bothered by it. They don't want to register, because to be fair, they're also using phones, and sometimes to register is complicated, and it might take some space. it just puts them off. So I use VT Comics most of the time because registration is not required. Students just have to go to vtcomics.com. They just need to set the scene. They can choose different characters and they just write the dialogues. And then what they can do is they can share the comic strip with teachers by merely screenshotting. Super, super simple to do. So that is what my student did earlier. Let me just go back to that slide. That's what she did. What she did was she did all of this. She screenshot, she sent to me, and then I just snipped this and put this over here for the slide. So it's extremely simple. It's extremely simple. And if you want to give feedback, you just look at a screenshot, you send a voice chat. Okay, you got this. This is not grammatically correct, and it's super easy to be done if you're using VT Comics. But VT Comics is there's not much of creativity you can explore with VT Comics. That is the downside of it. But with Make Believe Comics, this is much more cooler. But registration is required. Okay, this is the dashboard. Okay, so the dashboard below, if you look below, you can see all about me. You can see characters, animal friends, balloons and prompts, stationary objects. So those are the tools, okay, that you're going to use. It's quite simple and it's easy for students to play around with. And the white boxes are the panels. Okay, so I produced the comic like last night. It's called The Resurgence of Rey Mysterio. He's a wrestler from WWE. So I have been losing a lot of my wrestling fights recently. I must work hard to reclaim my throne as the best wrestler in Southeast Asia. My aim is, so that's the first panel. So you can see he's pretty worried. And then the second panel, you can see he's a bit fierce. My aim is to be the current champion, Blue Cyborg. He has, I think there's some error there. He has on a 9-match unbeaten run. He also beat me twice, girl. Okay, so you can see the character is a bit more aggressive. And then at the back, you can see Blue Cyborg there. I hear Rey Mysterio wants to fight me. And then the third panel, day and night, Rey worked hard till he broke the barbells. Then the final one, the Rey Mysterio looks jubilant. I finally did it. I beat Blue Cyborg and took home the championship. So again, this is something that that I just did. It took me only 5 minutes to do, and it's something that your students also can do. They can explore. The only thing is the characters the characters are set. They only have these expressions, and you can't really manipulate them. So there is a very good comment from Charles Hadfield, Mr. Charles Hadfield. He says, for drawing skills, do look up Andrew Wright's famous book, 1000 Pictures for Teachers to Copy. I think we will definitely look into that. Okay, let's move on. And also teacher Mazliza, before I move on, there's a comment by teacher Mazliza. I've seen my students anime drawing. Maybe I could ask my students to try, but what other apps that they could use? So I'm not really sure what apps they can use for drawing. I'm pretty sure there are a lot of apps out there they can use. But the tools that we are looking at today is all set. There's not much you can manipulate. I had a student who was really good at drawing, and she even did, after her SPM, she did pick up drawing. She did that as a diploma or degree. I'm not sure. But yeah, I mean, if you have these kind of students in your class, it's always good to encourage them to create some kind of content, and it's also good to encourage them to get them to start young, and also to just get them to think about their surrounding as well, and their environment, and think about stories that is happening around them, and this helps them to be more reflective. Okay, moving on. This is Pixton. This is also a little you need to register for Pixton, and it's a little bit more I would say not confusing, but a little bit more hassle, where there's a lot for you to play around with, where there's a lot for you to do in order to come into this section. This is the dashboard, so Pixton is super cool as well. Pixton is probably the best. But again, there's a lot to do. Okay, so if you look at the left, that's the panel. Then you have the background. So there's a lot of backgrounds you can play with. You can play with the hospital. You can. So the background that I chose was a field. You can choose a cafeteria. You can choose a castle. Then you have like a dinosaur over there. So there's a lot you can play with the backgrounds. Then you have the characters and the speech bubbles. It's a bit more complex, but students have a lot more to play around with. So if your student is only using phones for their online learning, I would not suggest Pixton. But if you have a student who is using a computer, Pixton is probably the best to play around with. And if your student is able to navigate the registration and easily, and also intuitively as well, then Pixton would be the best for you to introduce to them. But if you're dealing with students who don't have those resources, VT Comics would be the best way to go. Okay, so one of the best thing about Pixton is you can choose different set of characters, and even cooler than that, you can choose their actions. So even you can even change the characters' actions over here. So again, this is something you can play around with. Okay. So yeah, and then I think that's me over there, but I'm not that thin. I'm much bigger in real life. I hope you are still following this presentation. And that's all for today. So we have come to the end. We have come to the end of our presentation. So right now we will go back to the questions. So I think the question that I would want to take is a question by Rika. I think the question was what was the question? Rika, if you're there, can you resend your question? I'm not sure. But it was a really good question. Let me just try to locate it again. Okay. Any ideas of bringing stories from comics into academic writing prompt? Okay. It's a really good question. I love this question because I do a lot of academic writing. I think I don't have the best answer for this. This is just coming right out of my head. So I hope I do justice. But I think this is a really good question. One of the things that comics always deal with serious things as well. So there is this comic. I forgot the name. Okay, it deals with mental health. Okay, so what we as teachers we can do, we can. I mean, okay, let's not talk about the mental health thing because I don't know the name of the comic. Okay, let's talk about Marvel comics because I'm pretty good at Marvel comics. Okay, so let's talk about Marvel comics. Let's talk about the scene where Thanos wants to destroy Earth. But Thanos is actually a good guy, right? He does not want to destroy Earth. He just wants to reduce the population of Earth so that the world becomes self-sustainable again. Okay, so what we can do is we can take that panel. We can try to Google that thing out, the script from Thanos, which talks about him reducing the population of the world, and we can take it into academic writing. We can talk about overpopulation. We can talk about abuse of natural resources. We can talk about destruction of the environment. We can talk about climate crisis. So these are the things that we can do. Like, for example, I think Kampung Boy also is a comic as well, by Lat, and what he says, and there are a lot of instances where he says that me leaving to boarding school meant I had to leave my friends behind in the kampong, and I miss them a lot. I miss the river. I miss the environment. I miss the jungle. I miss the forest. And we can take that, and we can also bring it into academic writing. We can talk about life in the village and life in the city. So there's also something that we can talk about. Okay, so Samuel Isaiah, thanks Samuel for joining. For schools and students without access to technology, gadgets, and internet connectivity, how do teachers best incorporate the use of comics? I think the best way we can go about this is we can come out with a set of learning kit or a set of a comic module, give it to the students, and students will need to I mean, we can give the right instructions to them and come out with and produce their own set of comics that could be part of the lessons as well. That could be part of the lesson as well for them. So students producing their own comic, first maybe we can give them a module on how to like how to write their own comic, also some examples of comics, but this, it has to be context specific. That means I know Samuel is a teacher in was a teacher in a Orang Asli school. So if you are going to do such project for Orang Asli children, the comic or whatever we produce has to be related to the Orang Asli children, and then they will be able to look at their own environment and come up with their own set of comics or own set of drawings actually. But what it actually does, it helps learners to take charge of their learning. And it's very important they take charge, because why? Because once they feel they can do something, they can come out with a product, they can come out with an intellectual, I mean, they wouldn't know it is intellectual or not, but they will have this sense of engagement and attachment to what they have created, and this would empower them to live better lives, to know that they can provide and they can contribute something. And I think that is what is missing in education today. What we are doing with our students is, most of the time we are telling our students to gain a set of knowledge so they can become productive humans, but what we are missing out is empowering them to have the agency to be learners, and that is what is missing. And I think comic is one way that we can do that, we can help them to get that agency. It is maybe not the best way, but it's a way that we can try. We can definitely, because it definitely engages them as well as students. Okay, and also, yes, Sam, thanks for the comment. Empowerment indeed, to make meaning of the learning, hence creating sustainability. And I think this is the word that I was looking for. So thank you, Sam, for that word. Creating a sense of sustainability among the students. Most of the time, what's happening, especially in the current climate we're in, teachers are lost because teachers themselves are lacking agency. So what we can do is, as teachers, I think I saw somewhere in the comment that we can come up with a module, and yes, we should come up with a module, get this module to the students, and then hoping that these students will find the agency, and we need to provide and scaffold these students to give them that agency, to give them that empowerment to actually build something. And for them, building something means a lot. They take a lot of pride in building something, especially for kids, for children. They take a lot of pride in that. And I think that is what I want to say, giving them the empowerment. And I think comic is something that we can do about. We can roll with that. We can start with that. And I'm pretty sure Malaysian Open Alumni is really, if we are open for collaboration. So if you have any ideas out there on how we can make this for our students, and especially what Sam said, how do we reach to students who don't have gadgets? And I think that is very, very important. So there's another question from Sam. What would you say about the idea that comics are second-class reading material that may bring more harm and good to their vocabulary, for example? I think this is also like what we spoke earlier. Comics are seen as negative reading materials. I think this goes back to the research done by Wortham back in 1960s, where he said that all juvenile delinquents were reading comics. But the problem was, all teenagers at that era were reading comics, regardless they were juvenile delinquents or were they just a normal average teenager, or that whiz kid who was like super smart. So everyone was reading comics. So coming back to this question, so how do we tackle this? How do we tackle this? Okay, I don't have a system-wide way of tackling this, but what I can suggest is that we as teachers, we can shift our perception and say that we can use comics, and we must be open about it, and we should encourage our learners as well to use educational comics as well. And I think this is probably the first step to it. Once we have something more sustainable or something more concrete, I think then we can move on. But I think right now at this stage, it really starts from the teacher. So Hasina Ibrahim, this is a great suggestion. I'm teaching at a Orang Asli school too currently, and they constantly feel left out. I will start to let them have their own authority in creating on own. I think yes, it's important. I think Sam also talked about this about this. I think I would say learner agency or learner empowerment in one of his talks before, where he actually got them to actually play music or create music on their own using ukulele. And I think that is also something, again, sense of empowerment, because when students can see a product, when they can see something tangible, they become more empowered. And I think this is us as humans as well. I think this is just a general human thing, right? If you see a product that you created, or when you write something and you created that writing, you feel a sense of empowerment, like, oh, this is mine, and that helps you. That actually helps you not to become better learners only, but to become better humans, because you have more agency, you have more authority of yourself, you become more responsible of yourself. Okay, so yeah, I'm also Sam. Thank you, Mr. Charles Hadfield. It's been pleasure being here. Um, and also, I'm also looking forward for Sam and maybe Cikgu Hasina. If you want to collaborate, I'm super excited if we can collaborate and create something. Right? It doesn't have to be great. We just need to create something really small, and then just pass it around. Right? That's what matters. Okay, so we are towards the end. Okay. I don't think there's anything else I would like to add. Can you send? Okay, so we will send the link for SPR KPM. We'll send the link again. And it has been great talking for the past an hour and a half. I truly appreciate all of you attending this webinar. I hope that we have, I've definitely learned something, and I'm really looking forward for a collaboration if it's possible. And hopefully we can learn together and we can create something, and we can create something for our students. And most importantly, like, I always feel like the most important thing when it comes to education is making our learners in having more agency. My first few years of teaching, I didn't focus on that. I focused on exams, but later on I realized how important is that to get to empower our learners. And I didn't know that. I didn't know Gerard of My Chemical Romance left the band to write comics. So again, it's so cool how important comics are. Uh, yes, so I'm really great. I'm really happy to know that, Teacher Hasina, that BT Comic is where you can head first. I think BT Comics is super simple. I had students who never participated in class, who thought that I am a boring teacher. But when I said, okay, you're going to do comics today, boom, they sent in their submission. So yeah, comics is one of the best ways to go. And if there's anything that you want to collaborate, I'm really open for it. I think we and Malaysian alumni, we are open for it. Thank you so much, Teacher Nurul Ain. Thank you for joining us. And I think that's all from me. And I think the moderator around.
Yeah, I'm still around. So yes, we have finally come to the end of the session. So it's my pleasure to thank Mr. Pravin for the informative and interesting sharing. I'm sure everyone here benefits from it. And looking through the responses, yeah, I think we basically grew up with comics. And of course, every one of us have at least one favorite comics. So Okay, and especially there's one comment on the Amiza concerning reimagine nursery rhyme into stories. I think that will be a one of the focus in our next webinar. So allow me to mention that. And I guess that's all. Um, we hope that the session has managed to enthrall and rejuvenate everyone here and continue our journey in our profession. So don't be afraid of our students making error because according to Pravin, it says it provides opportunity to help them. Okay, so that's all from us today. Thank you for being with us today.
Okay, thank you everyone. It was really nice, and I'm very, very humbled by all of your participation and interest in this topic as well. Thank you, Teacher Sam, Sir Sam, for joining us. Thank you, Teacher Hasina. Thank you, Teacher Amiza, for giving a lot of comments. Mr. Charles Headfield, and everyone else who joined us. I'm very, very humbled. I'm super thankful as well. We will have another session, and I think the speaker is Teacher Farah Jasmine. So there's a lot
Yes.
going. There's a lot to unpack over there as well. And also thank
Yeah.
you, Madam Jo, for being the moderator.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Okay, so I think we are going to leave. Thank you, and see all of y'all in the next session. Thank you so much. I'm truly humbled.